So what I want to work on today is a sunset. Once again, doing it wet and wet, but I think I'm going to do it in 2 layers. I've been experimenting around with this and not entirely successfully doing it all in one fell swoop. So this one I started with my blues, started introducing yellows and oranges, and came down with some more blues, and I felt like I couldn't control it really well. This is a second one that I did, starting with my yellows, building into some oranges, and then putting blues into it. Once again, I want a little bit more control, I think. So let's try a third way, see what we can do. This time I'm going to do it in 2 layers. The first layer is going to have just the yellows and oranges. Then we'll let it dry, and then we're going to come back and introduce the blues. So let me see if I can manage to keep myself just doing that. It's funny, you get doing things and you just sort of want to dive in and do it. So step number 1 was to wet the page. You need to have a wet surface so that the paints will really move around in here, so we don't get hard lines on things. We get a nice soft edge between the different colors. So you either have to work with very wet colors, which I could start with a very wet yellow and then start adding other colors into it, or I can go like this and start with the water underneath. So let's start with the yellows. So Aurelian yellow, this time I have my consistency about the same as milk because I want it to run a little bit more. So let's start with this nice light area right down in here. And there's a beautiful streak of yellow that runs a little tiny bit diagonally up into here. And the yellows move and run up into here. They run off the edge of this page. They actually even sort of peachy up into there a little bit. I could almost do those just totally yellow, but let's just take this. Now this is my new gamboge with a little tiny bit of quinacridone rose in it. And let's just do this whole area right there. Bring it up on the side of there, and it runs off and into here. There's some on either side of this, and this area over in here feels like it's got a glow. Our biggest yellow is right in that area right there where the sun probably is, and then we go up into some orangey pinks up into here. And now let's add a little bit of red to this just to make it a little more. See if we like that. The reds are going to be our difficult part. I need to be careful about getting them in too dark. My temptation to add blue into this is going to be huge, but I think we're going to be better off if we don't. Let's just, maybe that's going to go up into there a little bit. There's blue down on the very bottom of this. It's not an absolutely pristine blue, but it is blue. And I can put some more reds and oranges into here again after I put the blue on. Let's just do a little bit of lifting in here, just because I feel like some of this should maybe be a little bit lighter. And it was part of the problem that I had with the previous one, is that I wanted to go into sort of the darkness that I was seeing in the photograph, but that wasn't necessarily going to get me let me get a little darker shape down here, like that little darker shape, and then some darker bits that run in through here. It's going to be purple up in here, so we can put red right behind there and then blue on top of that, because those are going to be a little bit purple. And I actually, on that same front, all of that blue could have just a hint of red underneath of it. So let's just, not too much, but just a hint of red. Get that a pretty thin red up there so it's not too much. Just sort of looking for where when the two colors mix together, what kinds of things might happen. We're not going to have any bright blues pretty much anywhere. Maybe down here in the bottom, this could be a little bit lighter blue, and maybe this little streak right in here, we can lighten that up just a little bit so when the blue goes in, it looks a little lighter. Okay, so let's let that dry. And I'm just wondering about this. Yeah, okay. Let's do a little more. Yeah, feels like a little more orange could come into this area here. I like what it's doing about pushing some of those colors away. And just coming down and finding some of this. This is feeling much nicer than the previous one where I felt like the purples just started taking over the entire picture, and I didn't necessarily want that to happen. So, you know, as this dries a little bit and when I put more colors into it, it changes how they react to the color underneath. When it's really wet, it just sort of spreads into it. When it starts drying, it just pushes it away a little tiny bit. And this is feeling much nicer. Maybe we can go over with the red right in here as it comes into that orange. Okay, I think we've got this. Okay, just a little tiny bit more red in here, just to sort of darken up that area a little bit. Okay, I'm sort of whispering and I shouldn't be whispering. So, okay, let's stop and I will let that dry completely before I do anything else with it. And good, and then we'll come back and we'll put blues into it. I did the first part of this painting yesterday, let it dry completely. I'm also seeing now that there's some little bits and pieces on here. This is totally dry right now, I can touch it. I did the first underpainting with quinacridone rose, Aurelian yellow, and new gamboge. And for this painting, the sky is a little more purplish. We've been working on two different ones, and the other one, the sky had sort of a greeny blue tone to it, but this has got a very purpley tone to the sky, and even down in here, this has a very much of a cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, purpley tone to it. So to help control this, I'm doing it in 2 layers, and we'll see as we build it up whether I was successful. It's always this sort of hard choice about whether to do it all at once and run the risk of your 3 colors coming together and making browns and grays, or doing it in layers, but then you've got to worry about how the layers are going to come in these soft areas. And so I'll have to do some gradations at the bottom of that where it joins this and leave some of these brighter colors behind. And I might have to come back in and do some more oranges on there, which reminds me, maybe before we start, I need to mix up some of that orange. So the orange mixture was quinacridone rose and new gamboge. And, you know, working in a white pan like this, you can see fairly well what color it's going to be. The best way to really see is to put it onto a sample of your watercolor paper that you're using to see what it looks like. And maybe a little more yellow in there, maybe just a little more yellow. Okay. I could have another mixture that was a little more peachy. It's had just a hair of blue in it, so it's going to brown it down very, very slightly, but I think that's going to be okay because I'm seeing some peachy in here that has how the purples come in. So what is happening with this peachy color? Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's dive in. Do I want to pre-wet? Do I want to come in with a little bit of damp paint? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my brush really wet, come in and just get a little bit of this paint on my brush. And because I don't really want to get too much of this wet at once, I'm going to paint this with a thin version of what's going to go on there later. And I can sort of see what I'm going to have happen when it hits some of these places that I painted before. And I can't control all of this, so I'm going to paint maybe down to about there. Let's take this down to the top of that one. And what's going to have to happen is it's going to have to grade down into where the yellows and the oranges come into here. But let me just sort of start at the top. I've got this on a little bit of a slant, so it's going to start running it downwards. And then it's going to hit those yellow areas, and I can just sort of stop and not paint around them just a little bit like we were when we were doing the I almost like some of that. This is all experimental. You know, you never quite know for sure what's going to happen, but if you've got dry edges and wet edges, you can play with those. And let's pull, this is going to be some more purple down in here. And maybe this will come out looking a little different than that sky. Let this grade down onto the edge of this. So that pink underneath of there is making this look even more purple. And then I can soften this edge by coming in with a damp brush. I've got to be careful about how wet it is. If it's too wet, when you go to dampen it, it's going to just do a little bit of what's happening here, where the damp water is going to push into that purple, which may or may not be a bad thing. And then that purple can run across through there, find those edges. Well, this is looking interesting at least. And let's see, maybe this can cut through one of these spaces just a little bit. Let that drain down into there just a little. But I'm going to leave some of those dry, hard edges. I'm actually liking them. And then let's try this. And I'm going to be careful about too much of this purpley blue over here now, because this is not very dark in here, and if I have too much, it's going to be too dark. And so that's part of our balance in here, is how, and I'm just trying to find these little uneven edges here, play with that. That almost feels like it needs a little more rosiness to it. So let me see if I can get just a little bit of yeah, that looks a little nicer, doesn't it? So I just got a little bit of quinacridone rose on my brush without having it too strong. Now down in here, I'm feeling like we're going to be working down into this orangey color. So let's see what we can do here. It's going to be too dark, isn't it? Too dark. Let's lift some of that back off, and let's just take a little bit of it up into there. Maybe it'll push some of those things away. Maybe some of these edges can be a little darker on that, and leave that little light piece behind. This might end up being a little too, it's easy for it to look a little too mottled, and so I need to be a little careful about that. Now this was that little lighter peachy color. Let's take a little bit of that on the bottom of here and bring it down into this. And I'll soften this edge because I just want it to go into that sort of yellow tone there. And let's see, let me come in with my damp brush. Okay. Now I need to be even a little more peachy over here. There's a little purpleness that's going to come in here. So let's just take a little thin bit of this purpley blue and bring it across this. And as we get down into here, there's actually a little stronger blue bit that's going to run through there. And maybe some straight cobalt blue into there. You need to be careful about this being too much darker than what everything else is. It's intense, but it's not really darker than. And then maybe there's just a little bit there. It's so impossible to actually totally recreate what's here. And so I'm having to be a little sort of judicious and not worry too much. I don't want to overdo it. When I did a preliminary one of this, I just like totally overdid it and got things a little too dark and a little too intense, and it didn't look that good. But this I'm liking, so Margaret, be careful. Now, down in the very bottom here, I have some more blue, so let's go ahead and try putting that in. And then there's a beautiful bright yellow above it. So let's just bring this up and let that sort of find the edges of that. It's going to be all blue down in here. And just, I like to follow that pattern, and then it's going to slowly turn off to 0 back there. Okay, this is all blue down here. And where it overlaps up on the color that I already had, it is definitely changing the color of it. And now I'm going to come in with a little bit of peachy color right here on top of this. Get that peachy pink. Too dark. Too dark. Perfect. Rinse my brush. Get some of that paint off of my brush. Dry the brush just a little bit so I can just pick up that without putting a lot of extra water in there, and then just bring this along, bring that along. Got some gorgeous oranges here from before, which is wonderful. Just, this feels like it should have some, bring that in up there, bring that up into the edge of that blue. Nice, nice. We're just sort of building these colors that are on the side of there's a little yellow in the middle, but then it changes out to being a little pinky orange, a little pink, sort of shift between purple to orange to yellow. And so I wanted to just get a little feeling of that here. Yeah, dried too fast. Okay. And this could be just a little feeling of purple. And that. And that feeling of purple running through it. Okay, I think I should stop because I'm actually liking this. Anything up in here, maybe just a little bit up in here. Okay, if I run this, that'll make that stand out more. Okay, and then let's just grade this out. Rinse my brush, drag it, pull it across these colors. So this whole thing of being able to layer up and finding little pieces that you want to have stand out, and what do you need to do to make those happen? Break that line just a little bit. a certain amount of fussing that you can do and still have it look okay, and then there's a point when you really just need to stop. And I always have a hard time figuring out when that time is. And do we want this a little bit darker right here, or is it going to make all that look too light if I do? And I think it's going to make it look too light if I do, so maybe I should, but this is too green. Okay, so let me just come in with a little bit of red on top of this green area here. And then let that come up. I'll add a little bit more blue in here after all. I've got to be careful about overdoing it. I want to be just delicate. Just a little light shift. Stop. I'm liking it. That's actually looking nice. Compared to the other ones that I did, let me just show you the disasters. So I got just a little too dark and intense there. Liked the purple. I came in with some sponge work and it got a little too busy feeling and didn't have that sort of light thing. And then this one here, although this worked nicely down in here and there were some nice oranges that went up in there, I didn't really like what happened with that purple. So trials. These are not always easy. I'm going to turn that off. It's got to dry completely now before we come back in and do the black silhouette on there.